Welcome back, everyone, to Let Me Know If You Need a Podcast, the show where we reframe asking for help as brave and badass in an attempt to eradicate the world's biggest offer of let me know if you need anything. We are very excited today to be joined by a special guest, Vivian Babin. Vivian is an incredible writer. She's a strategist. She has award-winning writing in a robust digital community that have created pathways to speak more openly about mental health and grief. Her work's been featured by Spotify, Instagram, Netflix, CBS This Morning. The list goes on and on and on. She's, of course, been published by Forbes, Rescripted, Well and Good, and many, many more. Please check her out on Instagram at Viv Babin, as well as Substack. Her Substack is filled with such great stuff. In this episode, Vivian shares her journey through grief and caregiving stemming from the loss of her mother at a very young age. She also highlights the challenges of that experience living in a Latino family, as well as how those experiences have impacted her adult life today. We also touch on the role of social media and how that shapes perceptions of loss, and then the necessity of asking for help. So we hope you enjoy the show, and thanks for joining.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Let Me Know If You Need a Podcast. I'm here with Kristen, my co-host, and today we're welcoming Vivian Babin. She is an amazing writer and advocate for grief in the youth space, and that is from her lived experience, which we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Vivian. We're happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. What a great way to start the year.
Yes, it is. It's right after the new year. And I have got my New Year's resolutions almost done. How about you?
I haven't really set as many resolutions, but I am doing like my vision boarding and trying to just figure out what my goals are for the year.
Yes, love that.
But I think, you know what, if I had one resolution, it's just to people please less. And I think that ties into the caregiver conversation. We can get there eventually.
Yeah, it sure does. So let's jump in. I want to talk first about kind of your story and how you got into the space of like youth-focused grief. So take us back to... we'll start with your mom's passing, and I'd like to hear it kind of from your voice and how that was at a young age. Was it 10?
Yes, it was. I just turned 10. My birthday's in December, and my mom passed actually this Saturday, 23 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So on January 10th. And it was I don't know that anything I have now with my relationship with grief and the things I'm doing had anything to do, and in a lot of ways, with what I experienced at 10. I think, if anything, the thing that informed it the most was how little people talk to me about grief at that age.
Yeah.
I grew up in a Latino family who, to this day, very rarely mentions my mom or talks about grief or loss at all. The one mention you would have every single year was when they would dedicate a Catholic Mass to her during her death anniversary. But that was really the limits of us talking about her in any way, shape, or form. And when she passed away, I've always been a deep feeling kid, and so I felt a lot, and I had nowhere to put it. And if anything, the conversations that were coming at me from teachers, from my family, from people around me were, okay, but she's cried enough now. Like, she's still crying. What are we going to do with this? And like, I was in, I think, the 5th or 6th grade at that point when it happened. And like, I spent a majority of that school year in the guidance counselor's office because the teachers just had no idea what to do with me because I would just be crying. And so I played a lot of Candyland and had my lunch with her. And it was like a moment of solace within that, but it was also an othering experience, right? Because suddenly I'm this kid who already was very shy beforehand, didn't have many friends, and all of a sudden I lost my mom. Everyone in my school knew it. My entire class came to my mom's funeral mass. Like, it was probably one of the more traumatizing moments of my life.
What did that feel like?
Horrible. I mean, I don't know that I even processed that until like 2 years ago, but just how horrible it is. And it's not like these kids were all my friends.
Right.
And so even if it was well-intentioned by the staff and like the teachers, it was weird, right? Because I'm in the front pew. My mom is in a casket in the middle of the aisle, and these kids are in the back rows. And I'm like, this is just like, it doesn't align to like the experience I'm living right now. And it kind of just felt like that over and over again through elementary school, through high school, never really finding my footing and how to talk about my grief, right? I went to an all-girls high school. that had a lot of mom-daughter things, or even just as simple as like when Mother's Day comes around and they're like, what are you doing this weekend? And I'm like, well, I don't have a mom. And so how do you have those conversations? And so I never felt like there was
over again too, right?
Yeah, and like it always feels new, even though it's never new to me, but it always feels new to the person on the other end of it. And so you learn along the way that like the best thing you could possibly do, which is the most horrible thing you can possibly do, is shelter and like cushion the words that you're saying about your grief and experience for the other person, right? So how do I not make them uncomfortable? What does it look like to make sure that they're okay after this conversation? And that erases so much of what I needed as I was growing up and what I was doing.
That is very powerful. And I feel like we hear that story of like wanting to make another person feel good about what you're going through, whether it's, you know, major tragedy, major illness. But that, and it seems to be slightly more of a female type of, you know, we have this need to kind of project that. So, what do you think, like looking back, and I know you've written quite a bit about it, but what, in your opinion, what should grief look like for a child?
Wow. I think it should be way more of a protected experience, like the same way that we protect kids with like what their beliefs around Santa. And like, you know, we know that this is a unique experience for this one kid. Maybe this kid doesn't know it yet, but the other kid does. And like, you're making this feel sacred for them. And I think that there's more of that needs to be folded into the grief experience for children, right? Like the permission to feel whatever they're going to feel for however long they're going to feel it. And whenever it does shift and change, providing like the right mentors for those moments in life so that it doesn't ever feel like a lonely experience, right? Because right now I think that it does feel lonely. I just finished reading a book that hopefully will sell at some point in 2026, but it's really around like the experience I wish I would have had as a like sixth grader of not having my friends or like my classmates come to my mom's funeral, and instead having the onus of being able to tell my grief story and my story of loss and my story of my mom in a way that felt empowering to me. So it's this 12-year-old girl, it's a fiction novel, and like just getting the ownership to like have that conversation in a way that she feels comfortable, but also like in the book, she's going to therapy. Her dad is really communicative about like the grief experience. Her friends know about it, like her friends that are going from middle grade, from elementary into middle grade with her. And so there isn't something that she feels like she's hiding from them, even if she's figuring out still how to tell a larger group. And I think that when you have that foundation of confidence, then it becomes a different experience going into like other aspects of your life, right? And I saw that as I was growing up and dating and doing different big life things that kept feeling scary because I never had the right foundation for it, you know?
I just feel like sixth grade is the worst time. I don't know. I remember being in middle school and it was awful, and I have a middle school daughter now and it's still awful. Like it hasn't gotten any better. And then to have this on top of it is just, ugh, like I can't even imagine it. So tell us, like, how did the story continue? So you're in sixth grade, obviously, I'm assuming several years of kind of tucking away that grief. And then at some point you live with your grandmother or you become her.
Yeah, so I grew up with my grandma. So my mom was a single mom, and me and my brother is 11 years older than I am. And we had always lived with my grandmother. So whenever she became my legal guardian after my mom passed away, it didn't feel like a big adjustment in terms of living situation because it was the same environment, just minus my mom. But my grandmother, when she became a legal guardian, was 75 years old. Like, so it was me at 10, her at 75. And we had, like, my mom had many siblings. So, like, one of my uncles was really a big factor in my life growing up. And it was a great way to grow up because it was a very maturely oriented way. She was the matriarch of our family, and, like, it kept some of the stuff normal and same. But also she's a 75-year-old immigrant woman from Ecuador, right? Like, she's not coming to the field trips. Like, she's not doing things at school. And so I felt like I had to navigate so much of that alone. So I always say that as I was growing up, so was she, right? And so, like, we were both growing, and I was growing up to take care of her. Like, it wasn't a normal parent-child relationship in that way. And so I ended up going to college locally in New York City and staying back just to be able to have like those extra set of eyes on her. And during my senior year in college is when she started having seizures in the fall. And that's kind of where that November is when it really started to go downhill for her health. At that point, she was like 85. And it's when I ended up having to step in a lot more as like her primary caretaker, not just like her default person that was always home in the afternoons with her. It was more like, she's going in and out of ICU. She's having these conversations. She can't have these conversations, right? Because every time she's going in, she's older. She's losing a lot of her mental capabilities. And so we're having to navigate these things for her. We never talked about end of life, right? Like this wasn't something you did. And so that's when it became a lot more of the caregiving aspect of what I was doing and how I was trying to figure out how to manage being like a senior in college about to graduate and also being a caregiver. And then really for me, it was in losing her that March that the whole grief experience kind of turned on its head. And it was like, okay, I'm doing this again all of a sudden. I'm not doing it the way I did when I was 10. Like I will not be doing this alone. How do I do this though? Because the environment around me isn't going to be one that is supportive, talkative, in any way, shape, or form allowing for this grief conversation. And so that's when I really turned to the internet as like here is like a place where I may be able to build a community that I never had growing up.
So you literally went through the most difficult time of a female adolescence into young adulthood, managing grief, and then basically caring for grandma even before grandma was sick, right? Because it sounds like she maybe leaned on your mom more for like navigating just everyday life. So were you writing this whole time? Was writing always something for you?
Well,
okay.
like writing from, yes, it was in a sense of like I had many journals and many things that were always the coping mechanism for me. I didn't have many friends, so I was writing a lot of poetry and a lot of like journal thoughts of what it was like to be coping. And like I wish I could find them now because I'd be so interested to see like what it's like to read a 13-year-old's thoughts on like how lonely she's feeling in those moments. But I was, and it was always the one crutch I had to be able to get through the days, right? And once I got out of college and started writing more professionally, it was still that, but in a different way, right? Because I learned really quickly that you can't write in real time or publish in real time the things that you're going through. Like there had to be a little bit of a distance between it, right? So I started going to therapy and started doing things that allowed me to put that space between. So even though people were reading it and saying like, wow, this person is going through like a lot of real things, I think it's always interesting with the internet when they think like you're like on a couch crying, writing all this stuff. And I'm like, ain't no way. Yeah. Like there had to be some time and some distance between it in order to be able to put it out. But writing for me has always been a tool for like how I navigate my grief.
Yeah. So do you remember the moment when it kind of became really clear that like caregiving was on your shoulders? And how did that feel as a 21? 21,
barely 21.
And then like beyond that, you were pretty much on your own, right? Like,
so it was, my grandmother had 6 kids. Okay. My mom was one of them. But it is a Latino family structure where usually one woman is like the person that they are kind of leaning on. And it just so happened that in the circumstance at that point in life, I was that person because I lived in the same house as her. And so her and my uncle, me and my uncle were like the 2-point people, right? But he was also not as present and for many reasons. And so I ended up having to have a lot of those conversations myself. And also I think there was the language and the cultural barrier that allowed for that to also be a reality. I hated it. I mean, there was beauty in it right afterwards where I was just like, how fortunate to have some of these moments with my grandmother. I think that there was, every single time she came out of ICU over those like 5 months, she was softer. There was something about her that softened, and I suddenly had the grandmother that like my cousins would tell me about, right? That wasn't someone who had lost her husband, who had lost her daughter, who was like more jagged around the edges. And that was beautiful. But the actual caregiving and caretaking process I hated it. Like, I didn't like to change diapers. I didn't like to, at that point, she was bedbound. So it was diapers, it was diaper rashes, it was shots in her stomach to make sure she didn't get blood clots. It was all these different things that made it feel really heavy.
So much responsibility at an age when you're like just dying to be in the moment, right?
Oh my gosh, 100%. Like, I'm already having to deal with just going to college. And just, for me, I knew that graduating was going to be one of these milestone moments that brought up a lot of grief around my mom. And so I'm already kind of balancing the anticipation of maybe having to deal with that. And all of a sudden now, like, I'm having to make really big decisions for my grandmother that I don't really know, right? It was really one of the most annoying parts, and I say this in my end roll speech, is just how often the doctors were like, wow, are you pre-med? And I'm like, no, I just had to learn how to talk to you. And like, the survival instincts kicked in. So I'm like, I had to learn the big words if I wanted to feel like I was actually making headway here in a way that was effective for all of us.
Did you ever feel like because of your age, you weren't taken seriously by doctors or people that were helping with your grandmother's end-of-life care or things like that, or decisions being made?
I think it wasn't as much that I wasn't taken seriously. I think it was that I was taken too seriously. Like, I think that their disregard and their negligence was not questioning why a 21-year-old was making these decisions and not affording me the opportunity and the resources to make those decisions in a better way that felt more supported and not as rushed. And so I think it very conveniently for people to say, like, wow, you must be pre-med, you know all these big words, like, you're having these conversations at our level. I can walk away and pretend that you're not 21 and that this isn't a really hard thing because you sound like you're playing the part right. So I'm going to just agree that you are. And that is a lot less messy than having to be like, are you okay about this? Like, what are you doing about this? And so I think that that was one of the biggest fallouts of just having that experience for me, was just seeing how often, for whatever reason in the medical system, it is just easier to like turn a blind eye for some of these situations. And maybe it's just because they have to get to the next patient or whatever it is. And I understand that. And also I think that there is a need for having more of that caretaker support that wasn't and isn't something that I knew at that point.
Let Me Know If You Need a Podcast is sponsored by Gift Well Soon. Do you have a friend who needs help but is too overwhelmed to ask for it? Let Gift Well Soon do the asking for them. Gift Well Soon, the care registry for life's toughest moments.
Are there any decisions that stick out that you're like, that was not something that should have been put on me, or that is something I should have had more support in the moment?
Oh my gosh, there was one time I was actually telling my cousin about this the other day, remembering this. I was about to present at one of my marketing classes. I majored in marketing in school, and someone else was supposed to be responsible for being there to sign for my grandmother's discharge. And I was in class and I kept getting phone calls, so I pick up the phone and it's someone from my family telling me, like, they said they're going to discharge her, but like no one is here, but this person was there. And I was like, well, can you sign for them? And they were like, no, I don't want this responsibility. And I'm like, at the end of this like class, or like in the middle of this class, about to do this presentation, outside in the hallway crying. Like, I'm on the floor crying. And I'm like, I don't know what to do, right? So at that point I called my grandmother's oldest son and I was like, you have to do, like, I can't do this right now. And like, he handled it and stuff, but it took me on the floor for some of this stuff to break, that like and I think that happens more often than not, right? But those are like the quiet moments that people don't talk about, or they're not like, you don't want to shame the rest of your family for like not picking up the slack wherever they are. Like, everyone has their own things, but it is really difficult to feel. And some of that I think is also my own stuff to deal with in therapy as to why I'm volunteering myself to be this person. Right? So I think since 21, I'm 33 now, I've worked on a lot of that stuff so that I'm not putting myself in as many of those positions as I once was. But at 21, what do I know? Like, I'm just trying to figure out, so like there's no forethought there.
Hey, at 21, you knew to outsource it to someone else. Like, that's great. You asked for help. He did it. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So what about, like, I feel like when we had talked previously, we had discussed specifically the millennial caregiving experience.
Yeah.
And you had a kind of a unique I guess like share with us what your perspective on that is and how it's maybe different than what past caregiving experiences have been.
I think that when you're a young person, and millennial now, like at that point when I was first talking about this, millennial was like me at 24. Right. I'm 33 now, so I feel like maybe it's a little bit different. But even then, I think that there's an expectation to caregiving and grief as a whole in older generations, right? We expect to lose people, right? We expect to have to care for people. That isn't true at 20-something, right? You don't expect to have to be on the receiving end of some of these conversations, on the flip side of having to make some of these decisions for your parents or for your grandparents, whoever it may be. And when you are, there's nowhere to turn, right? Because everyone else in your life is thinking about graduating from college, or they're getting their first job, or they're getting their first apartment, or they're thinking about their like boyfriend. And I was like, I don't know where to go and how to do any of this. And so I think that we often disregard that grief and caregiving aren't experiences that are limited to an older generation, right? Like they aren't only experienced then, they're experienced at any point. And if someone in their 20s is going to be given the permission from a medical system to sign off on some of these things, then that should come with the support as well. It shouldn't just come with the ability to have these conversations.
So on that line, do you think that social media in this space has been helpful to the millennial caregiver or more of a hindrance or a complication?
I think it's been so helpful. I mean, I turned to the internet after my grandmother passed away. It's like a form of trying to connect with people who were grieving and like experiencing anxiety or depression at that point or whatever it may be. And I've seen the uptick of that conversation happening within like the wellness and mental health space of just in the last decade, how much more comfortable we are about talking about mental health and how beneficial that is to the communities it forms. I do think that when something gets super popular, you also run the risk and the reality of it also becoming something that's glorified and something that where the stories attached to it are like really hard to process at times. You're like, wait, that's nothing like my experience. Am I doing this wrong? And so I think that there still has to be some sensibility from like your own perspective of like what is right for me to consume and what isn't, because the comparison game, especially when it comes to something that you're already feeling so much high emotions about, can be really tricky. But I do think as a whole, it lowers the barriers of entry of like, what are the resources? What do other people talk about? How are these experiences ones that can be helpful? When I had a friend who was experiencing something with palliative care and the person she was doing it for, she would ask me questions. She's like, wait, so they're going to do this now and they're going to do the morphine now. Like, what does that mean? And I hated knowing how to answer the questions, right? Like all of that was like very difficult for me and knowing what she was about to experience. But it was also like how lovely that she knew to come to me for these questions and that I had the right things to say. Yeah,
I feel like that comparison game in social media when you're going through something, and like when you were in 6th grade, I assume you probably were not on social media. But
no,
the 6th graders
nothing,
are
right?
now. A lot of them. So then that comparison game becomes even worse, right? Because you're living this reality of like, oh, my world's been turned upside down and everyone else is posting like how great they are and look at the ramen bowl I just got, that type of thing. So
I don't know what it would be like to have lost my mom at like 10 or to be like 15 and have lost my mom and to be on the internet as much as the kids are on the internet right now. I think that when we talk about like the social media conversation, I think it has its pluses, right? Like that community building is something that is beautiful, but I think it's also like the opportunity for the community managers or the people leading those groups or anyone. Like I have a platform, right? So my responsibility is to the platform, is to making sure that that community is safe for everyone that's involved to the best of my ability. But I think about like kids who are just trying to find like themselves in other people's stories, and that can get really tricky, right? Because suddenly you're seeing every kid with their mom and you're like, wait, does everyone? And like, it's harder to find the kids who aren't and who don't. And so I think that there is a judgment call that has to happen with the way that social is used when we talk about such heavy emotional topics. But there is room, I think, for both.
So one of our big things with starting the podcast was, and really I think it's kind of our mission with the company too, is just reframing what asking for help looks like and why it's like something that shouldn't be shameful. What did kind of your journey, your grief and your caregiving journey teach you about asking for help? Do you do things differently now than, you know, as a younger person dealing with all this heavy?
I'm still working on the whole asking for help thing. I think we always probably are. But I'm going to butcher this saying, but there's a saying someone told me about, like, you don't go to, like, the grocery store and ask for, like, a tire, right? Like, you have to go to the right people for the right things. And I'm learning what that looks like and who the people are that you can go to for certain things. And I think the chosen family is one that is so beautiful because of the emotional connection that you can have with individuals that feel as close as the people you were born with, but that have the opportunity to offer help and whatever help may look like in a different way. And I think that when growing up, like, I didn't have anyone to talk to about a lot of the things that I was going through because no one had the emotional bandwidth and, like, dictionary for that conversation for many different reasons, right? And I don't fault them anymore for it, but I do know that, like, as an adult, my responsibility to myself is to find the people who can, right? And so finding friendships that are deep and, like, wonderful and able to have the kind of conversations that I need to have, right? Like I said, this week is the lead up to my mom's death anniversary. I have friendships who are able to hold that, right? And I've been able to, like, be like, hey, I'm feeling really griefy about this. And they're like, oh yeah, I know. It's, like, on my calendar already that it's on Saturday. And I'm like, that's love. Like, I have never known it before. And the help isn't necessarily always like, I need help. It's like, I'm feeling this, and their ability to respond in kind with, like, which feels genuine for them. But I also think that, like I said at the beginning of one of my resolutions, is just, like, to stop people pleasing. And that part of that is, like, being really honest about, like, where is my bandwidth? What are my boundaries around different situations and different caregiving experiences, or different, just what my needs are. And being able to then say, like, I can't do this. And not feeling guilty or bad about that, because I'm a human too. And that is its own form of, like, helping myself,
yes,
which I think is really beneficial.
If you could just keep me posted on that, because I would love to touch base. Also working in that space myself. I was just informed yesterday at work that I need to, at the day job, that I need to, like, stop doing things when I'm asked, and be like, that's someone else's bucket. So
one of my other favorite sayings lately is just, like, those aren't my ducks to put in a row.
Oh yeah, I like that.
And that's been really good, because it's like, oh yeah, those aren't my ducks. They're ducks, and they're there and I see them.
Yes.
But they're not mine.
I need to step away.
Yeah.
So what's a message that you would love to have been able to tell your former self as a caregiver, a young caregiver or a young griever? What is something that you hold, like, sacred, that you feel like would have been great to hear at the time?
I think it's something I'm telling myself a lot right now. You will always feel guilty when you say no, and when you say, I can't do this, or, like, I don't have the capacity for this. And that guilt isn't a reason to not do it. And that guilt isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's just guilt. And, like, I read somewhere else, like, guilt is a very manageable, like, emotion, and it is like a really low price to pay for freedom. And I really liked that, because I don't know that anyone ever told me that there was a different option, that I could say no, that I can give it to someone else to deal with. And I understand, like, from a caregiver perspective, often you feel like you're the only person who could ever deal with this thing. And, like, there is no other option. There is no other person. But the reality is that there almost always is. And it may not be a perfect person. It may not be someone who does it exactly like you. It may be a nurse who feels a little bit more far removed emotionally, but can care for this person better than you can, right? And that, I think, was something about just me stepping back and being like, I don't have to be the top person in every one of these conversations. I'm allowed to, like, live my own life and have that experience be what it may be.
We've talked about this earlier in the season about a lot of caregivers don't, like, they want help, but they have a very hard time figuring out what tasks they want help with, because some tasks feel so personal and so important that it's very hard to delegate, right? And so it's kind of that balancing act of like, I know I need it, but I got to figure out where I'm willing to give up the control of it too. So
there's a lot of codependence that comes in with caregiving. And I think that there is a lot that you can take off your plate if you cut yourself as much slack as you cut the next person. And you're just like, oh, if I don't do this, then how will I get done? And like actually thinking through like what that can look like. And while where we all met, I remember during one of the talks, someone said that like when dealing with their parent who had dementia, a nurse told them, well, do you think your dad would prefer to have a nurse or do you think they would prefer to have a daughter? And I think it's a complicated answer because the reality is I think most times caregivers will say, actually, I think they want both. I think they want me to be the nurse and the daughter. And I think that they trust me in that way. But you can still decide that I just want to be the daughter or I just want to be like that person and finding kind of the gaps. And I think that there's also like a lot of cultural, socioeconomic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of people don't have the choice to not be the nurse, right?
Right.
So
that's the reality of the world we live in right now.
Yeah. Okay. So coming up on the anniversary of your mom's passing, how do you honor your mom and how do you honor your grandma at this point in your life?
I'm actually trying something new this year. So I was talking to my friend about how I was feeling really griefy, and she was like, maybe you should self-care and like do one nice thing for yourself every day, which I loved. And I was like, wait, let me gamify this the way I like. And so I'm going to go ahead and do like 23 different things this month that feel like I'm either honoring her or just celebrating myself and like loving myself the way I would feel like my mom would want to love me, or like doing something that I feel like I would have wanted to share with her. And so it's a lot of little things. I sent Mentee like $23 Starbucks gift card the other day just as like a little nod. And I'm going to try a pottery class with my husband, and I had Barry Grant, who is another really great grief person in this space.
Yes, I love her.
She's amazing. And she gave me a great idea. She said, if you go to like a Starbucks and you just order the drink under your mom's name, like you hear someone else say the name out loud.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God,
and that
so
is
good.
And it's so small, but it was like I've never thought of that, and I can't wait. So it's like something I'm doing today actually. And so like little ways like that I feel can be helpful. But I think as like to kind of come back around with losing someone at a very young age, I don't know how to honor my mom because I didn't know her. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I know how to honor the grief of having lost her 23 years ago and knowing the space that it requires for me to like experience this week and know like all the memories that are coming back and stuff, because I've known the grief way longer than I ever knew her. And so I don't know like when my mom's favorite things were, right? Because I was 10. And so I think that as a kid who has lost a parent very young, it's a different way to approach a death anniversary than a lot of people who are older. And it can sometimes feel like the comparison game of like, I can't play my mom's favorite music. I don't know what that is. And so I think that if you get trapped in that comparison game, which I've often done, then you see this as just a whole lacking experience the entire way through. Versus what I think I'm taking back this year is just some little bit more of that autonomy of like, no, like this can be my experience, even if it looks a little bit different.
I think that I lost my mom when I was 36, I think, 37. And even then I was very unsure of like, I questioned for like, is she proud of me? Would she be proud of me? Which as an adult woman, I felt like was so, I mean, I needed therapy to get through that. Right. But one thing I find lovely about getting a little bit older, and going through therapy and kind of getting to the point where you're proud of yourself and you accept yourself is then that talk that's internal becomes very like, oh my God, my mom would be so happy about this, right?
Yeah.
Like the little things she would be like, oh, this, I know what she would say, right? But I can imagine from the other perspective of not really having that, like I have a lot of background to work from.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't have that point of
You're
reference.
working more
And
from what other people have told you, really.
Yeah, and not many people have told me, right? Because
yeah.
the grief conversation isn't happening around me, right? So then it's like I'm putting dots together from what I kind of remember. But that self-acceptance is a really interesting point, and I think that comes through in whether you're caregiving and you're like, I can't do this. Like I physically cannot do this thing for this other person anymore. Or also like this week when I'm experiencing this level of grief, right? Like I literally, my husband the other day, like so sweet, and it's just like, wait, but like, are you okay? Like you feel so off and like all this stuff. And I'm like, I hadn't been able, I mean, we've been together 9 years. Every year is like the same, he asked me the same question. And like, I never know how to say it in a way that is actually going to register for him because he's never lost someone. And so it's like, we're always trial running things. And this year I said, I need you to accept that this week my 100% is 70. And that at 70, I feel like I'm thriving. And it may look like a lot less than what like last week looked like, but I need you to pretend it doesn't, because I will tell you when if I need something. I'm like really vocal. So I'm like, I will say if I like need a hug, if I need anything. And I love that you're checking in, but like, I have nothing else to give you in this moment. And I think that that level of honesty has also been really like something I've had to practice, right? Like I've had to teach him a grief dictionary that he didn't know, and I've had to teach myself how to like navigate it through the relationship. So it's all different all the time.
It's a lot of effort teaching everyone how to do that. Yikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is, but it's the reality of growing up, I think, as a whole, like collectively in a very grief illiterate environment. Right, like he's never experienced that level of loss. I know a lot of people in my life haven't. And so what is their point of reference? None, other than my experience, right? And so if I don't learn how to communicate the language of what that looks like, all he is seeing is someone who is really sad.
Do you see a world in which, like, you know, going back to like, I'm not going to people please anymore. Mm-hmm. Do you see a world in which you could go back to the people that did know your mom and not make them feel comfortable and like talk about that grief and not talk about the grief, but talk about the memories that might make them feel uncomfortable? Like, do you think that would be helpful, worthwhile? Because it's like it's like tying that all together almost.
Yeah, I think it's almost like deciding who is it worth to have those conversations with. For like, so funnily enough, my husband last night was like, well, do you know some of her favorite things? Like maybe that'll help us. Because he's just like a problem solver, right? And then I'm like, yeah, they all are. And so it's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm like, but you know what? This is like interesting. Let me see who I can go to. So I went to one of my older cousins. And I was like, do you remember my mom's favorite movie? Because he's much older than I am, right? So I'm like, do you know like my mom's favorite movie, like her favorite? And he was just like, all I remember is Ghost by like with Demi Moore.
Oh yeah,
like that's the one. And I can tell you, I didn't know. Like, if someone would have asked 2 days ago what my mom's favorite movie was, I wouldn't have been able to say that, right? But the minute he said it, I was like, oh no, I remember watching, like having this in the background so much, and that was like a click so instantly. But I guess that would be an example of like that felt worth it and low lift enough for me. Because I'm not in the business of trying to like process someone else's grief for them. And so I think that I have to be conscious of like what is something else I read a lot. So something else I've read somewhere was it's like people can only meet you as far as they've met themselves. And so I need to know what am I asking of someone, and are they actually able to ever answer that? And sometimes I don't know, but some people in my family definitely do. And so I'm like, oh, I can ask my cousin what the movie is, and like that'll be like a fine conversation. But I don't know that I would benefit from having a deeper one in some ways with like other members of my family, because they just haven't even thought about it for themselves.
Yeah.
Right. It's taking all of my effort not to bust out into the song that plays during
the pottery scene.
Pottery scene.
I haven't watched this movie in years.
I mean, but I feel like I watched it a lot as a kid. It was on in our house a lot. I don't know why.
I'm like, I didn't like when he said it at first, when I read the text message, I was like, I don't know what this movie is. And then my husband like Googled it. And then I was like, wait, I think it's about like the guy who's like a ghost. And I like looked it up and I'm like, oh no, this has been, like I have core memories of this being on the TV.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
I love it. What's your mom's name?
My mom's name is, well, her legal name is Delia Delgado, but we used to call her Mami Loli. Loli was shorthand for her middle name.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Vivian, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate people that dig in to hard things, and
thank you.
I just really appreciate your initiative to try to help other people in this space. I mean, you're doing a great job, and I can't wait wait for the book. Keep us posted on that.
And good vibes on that one. Yeah, hopefully I'll be back and to promote it at some point.
Yes, we'd love that.
But I appreciate it. I think that the conversations that we're having here just they're the things that help demystify it for other people. And like when you're looking for something, having something to actually find is what makes a really big difference. So I appreciate all the work that y'all are doing for this.
Yes.
Well, we like to end our shows with a question that kind of ties into the way people show up related to food during difficult times.
Mm-hmm.
So one question that we ask all of our guests is, what's your favorite comfort food?
Pasta.
Same.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna give you
Very
two.
specific. I gotta know
I'm
more.
gonna give you two. There's this pasta bake I've been making a lot lately that has turned into like my favorite home cooked meal, right? That I go to whenever I need like a comfort and a hug. But the second one is McDonald's because, and I'll tell you like a little story if you have a second. But like,
Yeah.
I've never had a very negative experience about a cemetery because when I was growing up, on Sundays, my grandfather died before I was born. And he was the first person like in my family to pass away. And the cemetery we lived in Manhattan, and the cemetery was in the Bronx. And every Sunday we would go to the cemetery, and this was at a time where like that cemetery was still a lot of grass. And so as kids who grew up in a building, this was the one time we went somewhere that like we could play. And so we would like go and take bikes and kites, and like there was an ice cream truck that would park right outside. And we would always have ice cream, and then there was a drive-through McDonald's that we would hit up right before we drove back home. And like all my family would congregate there. And so I never had negative memories of the cemetery. And so whenever I feel really sad, or if it's a random Sunday and I'm just feeling it, I'll get like McDonald's just because it's so nostalgic and it feels so tied to like my mom and my grandmother. So yeah, cheeseburger and french fries from there, Minnesota, does as much for me right now in adulthood as like a really good pasta bake with like kale and mushrooms.
Yeah.
So.
Yum. And I just want to state for the record that we're not sponsored by McDonald's, but we happily would be if you would like to.
We would welcome that.
We
the
will
podcast.
yes.
I love it. All right. We're going to wrap up
loving
with
it.
that.
Truly.
Yes. Thank you,
Yes,
Vivian.
thank you so much.
Keep up the good work, and we will be in touch.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us for that episode. And a very special thank you to Vivian for sharing her story and just really outlining how grief is not linear and it unfolds with you over time, especially when you experience it at such a young age. If you are listening and feel especially griefy, we would encourage you to follow Vivian on Substack at VIVBABIN, and as well as Instagram with the same handle. And if you know someone who's experiencing grief or loss, or you are yourself and you don't know how to ask for help, we encourage you to look at Gift Well Soon as well to kind of ask for what you need. And that way people can show up for you during your tough time. Thank you again for joining us, and let us know if you need a space for grief. And we will let you know that we would love for you to like, share, rate, and subscribe to Let Me Know If You Need a Podcast on all of your favorite listening platforms. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you. Take care.